All right, in today's video, we're talking about that age-old question, do we EQ before or after compression? And the answer is, of course, both. And don't worry, it's not very complicated. We're going to give you a simple formula and break it down. So let's get into it. So here's the simple formula. Step 1, subtractive EQ. Now, this includes cleaning up the track and especially high passing. Step 2 is compression. And step 3 would be mix EQ, or in other words, if you're going to do any boosting and any EQ that you're going to do that actually fits the instrument into the mix. So the first thing is cleaning it up and high passing to get it ready for the compressor. And that's where we're going to start. So this little bluesy guitar that we got going on here, you can see I have an EQ before the compressor and after the compressor. Let's turn everything off. Yeah, and as you can see, it needs some compression. It's a little dynamic for the mix. It's not going to glue in very well. Let's leave all this off and turn the mix back on. Yeah, it's just kind of disappearing in the mix, but it's jumping out a little bit for a second. So if we go ahead and just turn on the compressor. So that's just the compressor. Nice 4-to-1. And we're taking off, about 4 dB on average. So here's the subtractive EQ. I'm going to turn the compressor off and the EQ on. So we're rolling off some lows and we're taking out some mid here at 500, about almost 8 dB. Let me show you why. That's that frequency we're cutting. We just have more of that there than we need. And then just about 3K, we're taking out almost 4 dB, and this is why. Just a little more of that than we need. There we go, that sounds pretty nice. So what's the point of this? The point is a compressor is reducing the dynamic range, so it's kind of squashing the signal, right? So what it's going to react to first is going to be the loudest or most dynamic part of the signal. Now, because of the nature of sound, the lower the frequency, the more energy or volume or amplitude it takes to push that frequency. So by nature, all low end has a whole bunch of energy behind it. So in general, compressors are reacting to low end first, and so they may not necessarily be reacting to what you're actually hoping to compress. So if you have stuff in the mids or the highs that you actually want to compress, it's going to be reacting to the lows and it could overreact to the highs. The reason you do subtractive EQ before you hit the compressor is you're taking away everything that you don't want. That's going to help the compressor work so you don't have to overcompress, and it's also going to improve the sound that comes out of the other side of the compressor because you're not compressing unwanted frequencies. Because, of course, if you compress unwanted frequencies, you're making them louder. So you always want to do subtractive EQ first for this reason before it hits the compressor. So you can see the fundamentals of the chords that the guitar is playing here, all around in the 200s up to about 300. This is where the majority of the energy is, and you can see because those are the loudest peaks in the graph. So I'm rolling off a little tiny bit of that, but I'm also rolling off all of this low stuff. Now there's not much down here, so it's not very high on this graph in terms of amplitude, but it does affect the compressor. So this is why you want to high pass everything, and I do mean everything that you don't need. I am in that camp where you high pass everything you don't need right up to the fundamentals. And that doesn't just make compression easier and cleaner, it makes your overall mix in your headroom cleaner as well. So here's our subtractive EQ, that's step 1, and that's going to change the way it hits the compressor. Let me show you. So there's compression working with subtractive EQ, and let's turn the subtractive EQ off. Back on. And you can hear the difference. It's just simply cleaner, and we're getting a better sound coming out of the other side of the compressor than we do without it. Let me turn it back off. That's just the compressor. And subtractive EQ back on. Yep, That way we don't have to overcompress. I don't have to crank up this compressor. And after the compressor, I don't want to have to go in and take this stuff out because those frequencies that I don't want will have been even louder at that point. So yes, step 1, subtractive EQ. Step 2, compress. And step 3 would be mix EQ. And say in this case, all I did was give it a little boost at about 875. Now, the reason I don't do this boost before the compressor is because the compressor is going to also have to react to that increase in signal. So it gives me a cleaner and better sound if I give this boost after the compressor. This is the general formula for whether or not you EQ before or after compression. It's always both. And when it comes to bass guitar and acoustic guitar, it gets a little more nuanced. We approach those two things different ways, but I do have a video on how to mix bass and the one on how to mix acoustic. So we're not going to get into those today, but yes, the formula is the same in the sense that you're going to EQ before and after compression for different reasons. Now, pianos are one of the best examples for this formula about EQing before and after compressor. Let's take a listen here. So here's the left hand, and here's the subtractive EQ on the left hand. Now, what's missing is the high pass. I haven't taken off any of this low, and I did that for this tutorial on purpose because we're going to do it all together on the piano bus. So it'll be really easy to hear the impact it has on the compressor. And here's the right hand, and here's the subtractive EQ on the right hand. Now, some of these high frequencies, I have a dip here of 6 dB at 7K and another 6 dB at around 3K. And I'm dipping those out before they get compressed for the reasons that I explained earlier. And I've also cleaned up a little of the low mids down here at about 220. So subtractive EQ on the left and right hand, and now it's running through a mix bus for the piano. And let me turn everything in here off, because what's in here is more subtractive EQ with the high pass, then the compressor, and then the mix EQ. So let's turn all this off. Yeah, big difference. So now what you're hearing is just the subtractive EQs on the left and the right hand without any other processing on the mix bus. So, back on. And let's hear it in the mix. We can hear the left hand, we can hear the right hand. The dynamics are under control. It still has a little ways to go, but it's sounding all right. Let me turn all of this off. See, all of a sudden the piano is pretty muddy and the dynamics are not very under control. So, back on. All right. So here's what's going on here. The first EQ is simply a high pass, and this high pass is set at 100 Hertz. Right now in Nova here, we're looking at the input signal. All right, as you can see, the fundamentals are below my high pass. I'm gonna switch it to the output signal. All right, do you see where the lowest notes are around 50 Hertz? Let me go back to the input. Now you see all this stuff all the way down to 15 and almost 10. So the point here that I'm trying to show you is by high passing up here at 100 Hertz, back to the output signal, I still have the low fundamental information. It's just been trimmed off, but it's not cutting it out. So I am high passing a little higher than I would normally like for this piano before it hits the compressor. So we have a ratio of 4:1, and we're averaging over 6 dB taken out pretty steadily. And I have the makeup set at 5 dB. So we're taking a healthy amount out. Now, let me turn the high pass off and watch the compressor. We have a little bit more dynamic issues hitting the compressor. Now, if you just listen to the clarity of the left hand versus the right hand when I turn the high pass back on, and listen to what's coming out of the compressor in terms of the balance between left and right hand. Back off. Back on. So obviously what's coming out of the compressor is missing some low end that we do want, but as you can see on Nova down here, there's low end that's still hanging out. It's just been reduced a lot, so we can bring it back up after the compressor. But the main point here is how much nicer the piano sounds coming out of the compressor with the high pass on. Let me turn it off one more time. See, there's less definition on the right hand of the piano, and the whole thing is more muddy. Let me turn it back on. Yeah, see, with the high pass on, it's just a way more unified sound, it's more balanced, and it sounds more cohesive. So, subtractive EQ on this is just the high pass, then it hits the compressor, and we don't have to overwork the compressor and make the piano sound lousy because there's too much compression. And the next thing we do is turn on the EQ that comes after the compressor, the mix EQ, which is bringing our low end back. So here we're giving a nice healthy boost. Let me turn it up a little more, and I'll solo it out. So this is the low end that we're bringing back in the mix EQ after the compressor, and I have this set at a bell curve at 100 Hertz, and you can see we're on input signal now. There is the low fundamentals and the low information all the way down to about 45, 40 Hertz. So the high pass didn't remove everything, it just tamed it, which helped the compression, and then after the compression, we can bring it back. So this little bit of dynamic EQ, bringing our lows back and getting our highs, high mids and highs to cut through again, to cut through the mix, that's step 3 of the recipe. So this little formula is subtractive, then compression, and then mix EQ. Let me turn it all back off. Back on. And yes, we still have a little less low end, but that's what we want. The original recording had more than we wanted in the mix, and when I bring the mix back in, you'll still hear that there's plenty of low end in the piano, but I have enough of it taken out so it's not competing with the bass and the drums. Yeah, very nice. You're always going to want to cut whatever you can afford to lose, and especially high pass out before you compress. That just gives you a way easier job compressing, and the compressor won't tend to clamp down on your high mids because it's overreacting to the lows. And then after you compress, you do your mix EQ, which includes your boosting, maybe a little more cutting, and fitting it into the overall mix. So if you follow that simple formula on pretty much any instrument, you're not going to go wrong. It's a great method, it's tried and true, and this is just pretty much the standard of how you want to do it. So just think of those 2 EQs on each side of the compression as performing 2 entirely different functions. Do your subtractive EQ first, and that'll make your compression job a lot easier, and then worry about trying to EQ it into your mix. So I hope that helps. Hope you got a lot out of that. Let me know what you think in the comments, as always, and if there's anything you want me to tackle, just hit me up, and I'll catch you on the next one.